They say routine is the quiet killer of passion, but in our case, routine was what held us together. It was the silence that came after, the silence that crept into every untouched coffee cup, every skipped kiss goodbye, every night when we lay side by side, but worlds apart, that began to gnaw at the edges of our marriage like termites beneath polished wood. My name is Michael, and I had been married to Lauren for nearly 7 years when the silence started to feel louder than the words we no longer said. We met in the most ordinary way, a shared Uber on a rainy Tuesday afternoon in Chicago. She sat on the opposite end, soaked from the storm, cradling a cheap sketchpad to her chest like a sacred text. Her fingers were stained with charcoal. I was late to a client pitch, annoyed, cold, and wet. She looked over at me once, gave me a polite smile, and said, "Storms make better art than sunshine." Back then, she was full of that kind of poetic nonsense. Back then, I thought it was beautiful. We married 2 years later. Moved into a small, cluttered condo with creaky hardwood floors and a view of the alley behind a bakery. Every Sunday, we'd wake up to the smell of croissants and the sound of church bells from St. Catherine's. We filled the place with books and paints and Polaroids. She would sketch me while I worked on my laptop, claiming she loved drawing my focused face, whatever that meant. I would leave her little notes on her easel. "Don't forget to eat. You get cranky when you're hungry." Things like that. But time has a way of muting color. Her sketchpad now lay untouched most days, abandoned on the edge of the bookshelf, its pages curling. I couldn't remember the last time she drew me. Lauren said she wanted to try something new, a night art class at the community center. "It's just 2 nights a week," she told me, her eyes lighting up for the first time in what felt like years. "I need something that's just for me, you know?" I nodded, told her it was a great idea, that I'd handle dinner on Tuesdays and Thursdays. She kissed me on the cheek, said, "Thank you, babe," and that was that. The first few weeks, she came home energized, chattering about compositions and color theory and how freeing it felt to create again. She mentioned the instructor, Julian, in passing. "He's got that whole tortured artist vibe," she joked once, swirling her wine as we sat on the balcony one evening. "Like if Hemingway and Picasso had a love child with perfect cheekbones." I laughed. I genuinely did. I wasn't threatened. I knew Lauren. I knew her heart. Or I thought I did. It wasn't one big thing that changed. It was a series of small ones. She stopped mentioning class. Her sketches disappeared from the fridge. She started dressing differently on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Less yoga pants and paint-splattered hoodies, more fitted jeans and soft, off-shoulder sweaters. She wore perfume again. Not the casual citrus one she used for years, but a musky, floral scent that lingered even after she walked past. She smiled more. Just not at me. I dismissed it at first. Maybe the class was boosting her confidence. Maybe she was just finding herself again. I wanted to be supportive. That's what a good husband does, right? Supports. Encourages. Trusts. But then came the night of the gallery show. It was late spring. Lauren had invited me to her class's end-of-term exhibit, a modest event at the local gallery on Madison Avenue. She was oddly hesitant when she told me about it, like she'd forgotten I was part of her life outside that class. I showed up in a crisp blazer, holding a bouquet of sunflowers, her favorite. The gallery buzzed with soft chatter and the clinking of wine glasses. Lauren stood near the center, laughing too loudly at something Julian had said. He was tall, with salt and pepper hair and a silver ring on his thumb. He leaned in close when he spoke to her, and she tilted her head just slightly, exposing the slope of her neck in a way that felt too intimate. I watched her tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, an old nervous habit, and place a hand on Julian's forearm. My stomach clenched. She had never touched my arm like that in months. She noticed me then, gave a surprised smile, and hurried over, but something in her expression made my chest hollow. Not joy, not pride, guilt. "You made it," she said, kissing my cheek, her fingers cool against my skin. "I didn't think you would." "Why wouldn't I?" I asked, offering the flowers. "I just didn't think you'd remember." I didn't know how to respond to that. Her piece was tucked in the far corner of the room, a charcoal sketch of a man's back, broad shoulders, tousled hair, the soft outlines of fingers tracing the spine. I looked at it, then looked at Julian, who had taken off his blazer and stood sipping wine across the room. I didn't ask. I didn't accuse. I just swallowed the dry lump in my throat and stayed silent. That night, we drove home in silence. After that, The shift was undeniable. She began staying out longer after class, claiming the group often grabbed drinks to unwind. "It's nothing, just a few people from class," she'd say, tossing her bag on the couch, avoiding eye contact. One evening, I heard her giggling in the bathroom. I approached quietly and found her on the phone, whispering. The door was cracked. I told him I was tired. I'll say we had a critique that went long. A pause. A soft laugh. "Julian, stop. You're bad." I stepped back before she saw me. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on the edge of the bed, staring at the ceiling, while she curled beside me and slipped into sleep like nothing had changed. I could smell that musky perfume again, faint, but unmistakable. My gut churned. The following week, I left work early, told my manager I had a dentist appointment. I drove to the community center, parked 2 blocks away, and waited. At 7:02 p.m., I saw her step out of the building, laughing as Julian held the door. They didn't head to their cars. Instead, they turned down the sidewalk, walking close, their hands brushing. At 7:14, he placed a hand on the small of her back as they slipped into a narrow alley between buildings. I waited 2 minutes before I followed. What I saw will stay etched in my mind forever. The way she clung to him, like she was drowning and he was her only air. The way he kissed her, possessive, his hand buried in her hair. The way she moaned into his mouth, oblivious to the world outside their stolen moment. And the worst part? The smile on her face, the one I hadn't seen in years. For the next few days, I existed like a ghost inside my own life. I didn't confront her. I couldn't. Not yet. Every time I looked at Lauren, I saw the alley. I saw her fingers in his hair, her lips parted in that soft, sinful smile that used to belong to me. The betrayal pulsed in my chest like an open wound I couldn't stop touching, prodding, hoping the pain would dull with repetition. But it didn't. It only grew heavier. Lauren moved through the house with the ease of someone who believed her secret was still safe. She sang softly while loading the dishwasher. She sat curled up on the couch with a mug of tea, sketching again. Always sketching now, the pencil whispering against paper like a confession in code. The change in her was stark, and it was cruel. She had come back to life in the arms of another man. And me? I was slowly turning to stone. The silence between us thickened. She didn't seem to notice that I no longer asked about her day, or that I stopped reaching for her at night. She didn't flinch when I pulled away from her kiss. Maybe she thought I was just tired. Maybe she didn't care. The irony was almost laughable. I had spent so many months worrying about her drifting away, and when she finally did, I was the one left clinging to the wreckage. But I wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. So I started watching. Tuesday evening. Thursday evening. Like clockwork. I learned how long it took her to get ready. 43 minutes. Give or take. I learned the exact time Julian left the center and where he parked his car. I learned the name of the wine bar they sometimes slipped into, the dimly lit place with red leather booths and jazz on vinyl. I never followed them inside. I couldn't stomach it. But I watched them through the foggy windows, sipping wine, leaning close, sometimes laughing in that private, intimate way only lovers laugh. I started photographing them. First with my phone, then with a camera I borrowed from a friend under the pretense of getting into photography. I didn't know what I'd do with the pictures. I wasn't thinking clearly. My life was unspooling. And this, capturing their affair like a documentary, gave me something to hold on to. Proof. Reality. The raw edges of what was actually happening. At night, I'd scroll through the photos, one by one. Lauren, looking radiant and free. Julian, smug and infatuated. The ache in my chest deepened with every image. One Friday afternoon, she called me from the kitchen. "Hey, babe, my class is taking a weekend trip, kind of an artist retreat. It's in this little cabin community by the lake. We'll have workshops, hikes, fire pits. Might be good to unplug for a bit." I paused in the hallway, just out of her line of sight. "Julian's leading it." I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. She froze. Just a beat. But I heard it. "Yeah," she said, too casually. "He's really into plein air painting. It's kind of his thing." I nodded and walked away before I could say something I'd regret. She left the next morning with a backpack slung over one shoulder, a cooler in her hand, and that perfume again, the musky one, thick with lavender and sandalwood. She didn't kiss me goodbye, just a distracted wave and the sound of the door clicking shut behind her. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I packed a bag of my own and drove up to the lakeside cabins just after midnight. There were 12 units nestled in the pines, their windows glowing like soft lanterns in the dark. I parked far enough away not to be seen, wrapped myself in a dark hoodie, and walked the perimeter, crunching leaves underfoot. Her cabin was easy to spot, number 6. I recognized her jacket hanging over the porch rail. The lights were out, but I could hear faint music inside. Piano. Slow. Melancholic. I crept closer, heart pounding, my breath fogging in the cool air. The curtains were sheer. Not enough to see everything, but enough to see movement. Shadows. A figure crossing the room. Another rising to meet it. They stood close, so close. Julian's frame was unmistakable. And hers, my Lauren. She leaned into him like a woman who had never known another man. I turned away, stumbling back into the woods, while rising in my throat. She was gone. Not physically. Her body still lived in our home, still shared our bed. But her spirit, her love, her laughter, they had all been handed to someone else like spare change. And I was left holding the empty wallet. By the time I returned home the next morning, I had made a decision. I couldn't save her. I couldn't drag her back into our life like a possession. But I could at least make her face what she'd done. That evening, I set the table for 2. Candles. Wine. Her favorite roast chicken. The works. When she walked through the door, she paused, surprised. "You cooked?" she asked, dropping her bag near the door. I nodded. "Thought we could talk." She looked wary but said nothing. She slid into her chair, took a sip of wine, and began eating slowly. For a few moments, it almost felt normal. Almost. "I saw you this weekend," I said softly. Her fork stopped midair. "I saw you with Julian. At the cabin." Her eyes widened. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. The silence was deafening. "You followed me." "I had to know," I said. "I had to be sure." She set her fork down, her fingers trembling. "I didn't mean for this to happen, Michael. I swear. It started out innocent." "Did it?" I asked. "Because the pictures I've taken tell a different story." She blinked, stunned. "Pictures?" I stood, walked over to the counter, and pulled out a thick envelope. I tossed it onto the table. "Every lie, every night out, every touch you thought no one saw. It's all there." She opened the envelope with shaking hands, flipping through the photos, her lips parting in horror. Michael, don't," I said, my voice cracking. "Don't try to explain away months of deception in a single breath." Tears welled in her eyes, but I couldn't find any sympathy left in me. Just grief. Just the hollow ache of betrayal. "I don't know who you are anymore," I whispered. "And I don't think you know either." She stood slowly, her body trembling. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I nodded, but the words felt like ash. "I'm staying at a hotel tonight," I said, grabbing my coat. "You have until morning to decide if there's anything left here worth saving." And with that, I walked out, the door clicking shut behind me just as it had when she left for the retreat. But this time, it was final. Or so I thought. The hotel room was a sterile gray box, walls too smooth, too quiet. I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling like it might offer answers. But the only thing it gave me was the flicker of the overhead light and the echo of Lauren's voice repeating in my head. "I didn't mean for this to happen." That line kept looping, like a scratched record. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to pretend that the months of secrecy and the lies were some terrible, tangled misunderstanding. But I had seen the truth. I had photographed it. And yet, I hadn't stopped loving her. That was the worst part. At dawn, I checked out of the hotel and drove around aimlessly. The city hadn't woken up yet. Just delivery trucks, joggers, and coffee shops turning on their lights. I parked near the lake, the same lake that bordered the cabin retreat, and watched the water ripple under a slate-gray sky. The air smelled like damp leaves and distant rain. It brought me back to the beginning. Lauren and I used to come here on Sundays, sharing a thermos of coffee while sketching strangers walking by. She'd draw them. I'd guess their stories. She once told me, "You always imagine the best in people." Maybe that was my mistake. When I returned home, the air inside felt different, heavier, quieter. I half expected her to be gone, but her shoes were still by the door, and the scent of that musky perfume lingered faintly in the hallway. A note was propped against the lamp on the console table. "Michael, I read every word in those photos. I saw what you saw. I felt it all. The guilt, the shame, the weight I've been pretending didn't exist. I don't deserve to ask anything of you. But if you're willing, meet me tonight. At the studio. I need to show you something. If you don't come, I'll understand. Lauren. I read the note twice, then folded it and tucked it into my jacket pocket. Part of me wanted to burn it. The other part, the wounded, foolish part, was already reaching for my keys. By nightfall, I was parked outside the art studio she'd been attending. The place looked different in the dark. Empty. The buzzing neon sign in the window cast fractured blue light across the sidewalk. The front door was unlocked. I stepped inside. The air was thick with turpentine, varnish, and old wood. Easels stood like skeletal guards, paintbrushes suspended mid-air from the last class. A faint light glowed from the back, behind a set of double doors. I pushed through them. Lauren stood in the middle of the room, barefoot on the paint-speckled floor, surrounded by her canvases. Her hair was pulled up in a messy bun. She wore an oversized flannel shirt that belonged to me, one I thought she'd thrown out years ago. "Thanks for coming," she said softly. I said nothing, just stared at the room around me. There were dozens of paintings, some half-finished, others clearly abandoned. They weren't like her old sketches. These were visceral, dark, raw. She motioned to the largest canvas, leaned against the far wall, partially covered by a cloth. "I want you to see this one." I hesitated, then crossed the room and lifted the cloth. It was me, or rather, a version of me, standing alone in the rain, drenched and gaunt, with eyes that looked directly at the viewer, haunted, betrayed. Around me, the world blurred, swirled with shadows and storm clouds. But the detail in my face, it was painfully intimate. Every line, every crease, every flicker of emotion she had captured with brutal honesty. I turned to her. "You painted this?" She nodded. "When?" She looked down. "After the first time with Julian. I came here, and I couldn't stop painting. I didn't even know what I was doing. My hands just moved. It was like you were looking at me, accusing me. I couldn't escape it." I stared at the painting again. It was beautiful and cruel. "I know this doesn't fix anything," she said, "but it's the truth. And I needed you to see that I haven't been pretending it didn't matter. It mattered. It tore me apart. Then why keep doing it?" I asked, my voice low. She closed her eyes. "Because I was lost. Because I thought I'd disappeared somewhere between who I used to be and who I thought I should become. And Julian, he made me feel visible again. Not whole, just noticed." She walked over, hesitating at arm's length. "But it was never love, Michael. I don't think it even mattered to him. It was about the chase, the thrill, and I was stupid enough to let that be enough, for a while." I didn't respond. My eyes drifted across the other canvases. They were filled with fractured images, distorted faces, splintered silhouettes, bleeding colors. Chaos on canvas. "I ended it," she said suddenly. 2 nights ago, after the retreat." I looked at her. "Why?" "Because I realized that I don't want to be seen by someone who only knows one version of me. I want to be seen by the man who's known all my versions and still stayed." She stepped closer. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said, her voice trembling. "I just needed you to see me. Really see me. One more time." The silence between us was like glass. Fragile. Reflective. I took a deep breath, feeling the storm inside me settle into a low, steady churn. "Let's go home," I said. Her eyes filled with tears. But it wasn't reconciliation. Not yet. Maybe not ever. When we got home, she went straight to the guest room without a word. I watched her go, unsure whether I felt relief or sadness. Maybe both. I stayed in the living room, staring at the half-empty wine glass she'd left on the table the night before. I picked it up, turned it in my hand, then tossed it into the sink and listened to it shatter. Later that night, I sat at her desk. I needed to see what she had been working on. I opened the sketch pad lying near the window. The first few pages were quick studies of hands and faces. But about halfway through, something changed. The lines became more jagged, the shadows darker. Then I turned to a page that made my blood run cold. It was Julian, but not as she had painted me, with sorrow and weight. No, this one was different. His face was twisted in anger, his mouth a hard slash. Behind him, scrawled in charcoal, was a sentence. Not elegant, not poetic, just 5 words, written over and over again in increasingly frantic script. "He won't let me go." I stared at the sketch for what felt like hours. Julian, his eyes filled with fury, his mouth curled in a snarl, as though the paper couldn't contain his rage. And those 5 words, written like a scream in ink. He won't let me go. It didn't make sense. Lauren had told me she ended it, that it hadn't meant anything. But this looked like a warning. Or a confession. My hands trembled as I closed the sketchpad. I sat in the quiet, the soft hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the house, and felt the cold bloom of realization settle in my chest. Something wasn't right. I went to the guest room and opened the door slowly. Lauren lay curled up on her side, eyes open, watching the shadows crawl across the wall. She didn't turn as I entered. I sat on the edge of the bed and placed the sketchpad beside her. "Tell me what that means," I said quietly. She turned her head, slowly, her expression drained of all fight. "It means I was wrong," she said. "About everything. About him." She sat up, pulling her knees to her chest, her voice barely above a whisper. At first, Julian was charming, thoughtful. He listened, complimented my work. He made me feel like I was worth something again. But the more I pulled away, the tighter he clung. He got jealous if I missed class, started showing up outside my work, texting me constantly. He didn't take no easily. She glanced at the sketch. I drew that after I told him it was over. He laughed at me, said women like me don't get to walk away, that I'd come back eventually, because men like you are weak, and men like him are unforgettable. Her words hit me like stones. I had thought this entire time that she was chasing a thrill, that she had thrown our marriage away for a cheap affair. But this sounded different, more insidious. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "Because I didn't know how. Because I was ashamed. Because I thought maybe I had asked for it, by going to his class, by letting things start, by not stopping him sooner. And because I thought you'd never look at me the same way again." I sat there in silence. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I finally understood how deep the wound ran. For both of us. "What do you want to do?" I asked. She wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her flannel. "I want it to be over. Really over. I want to forget all of this. But I also want to do the right thing." We both knew what that meant. The next morning, we contacted a lawyer and began the process of filing a report. It was messy, emotional, but it was real. Lauren handed over texts, emails, sketches, evidence that Julian's charm had twisted into control, that the man I had watched from a distance wasn't just a rival. He was a predator, dressed in the smock of an artist, hiding his bruises in beauty. She also officially withdrew from the art studio. The director didn't seem surprised. I could tell this wasn't the first time they'd received a complaint. But this time, it wouldn't be quiet. The story didn't make headlines. It didn't turn into a public scandal. Julian resigned quietly, took an extended sabbatical, and the community center issued a vague statement about personnel restructuring. Cowards, I thought. But it didn't matter. He was gone, and Lauren was free. We didn't magically heal overnight. Marriage doesn't stitch back together like canvas. Some days we didn't speak. Some nights we lay in the same bed, backs turned, oceans of guilt and grief between us. But we didn't give up. We started going to therapy, separately at first, then together. We talked about everything. The silence that had crept in before Julian, the resentment, the loneliness, the small ways we'd both disappeared from each other long before she ever picked up a paintbrush again. I learned to listen, really listen. And Lauren learned to stop apologizing for needing space, for needing to feel alive outside of being a wife. She started painting again, not at the studio, not under someone else's gaze, just in our spare room, her space, her time, her way. I bought her new brushes. She laughed the first time I surprised her with them, said it was like giving someone flowers after they cheated on you. We both laughed, not because it was funny, but because humor was the only way to stand in the wreckage without crumbling. 6 months passed. We went to dinner one night. Same place we celebrated our 5th anniversary before everything began to unravel. The lighting was warm, the music soft, and the smell of garlic bread floated through the air like a promise. "I never thought we'd get here," she said, sipping wine. "Me either," I said. "But I'm glad we did." She reached across the table, took my hand. "I'm sorry I broke us." I squeezed her fingers gently. "We both had cracks. You just found a way to shatter first." She smiled at that. A real smile. The kind I hadn't seen since the beginning. Later that night, we walked home in silence, side by side, the city humming around us. At the front door, I paused and turned to her. "Do you ever miss him?" She didn't flinch. "No, but I miss who I thought I was when I was with him, and I'm learning not to. I nodded. Inside, I found her latest painting drying in the spare room. It was us, reimagined. Older, wiser, sitting on a bench by the lake, backs to the viewer, her hand in mine. The sky above us wasn't sunny or stormy, just overcast. Quiet, honest, a still life. No longer chasing color or drama or illusion. Just being. Together.